Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Welcome back to Clearer Than Truth. Today, we're diving into the intersection of law, technology, and the future of justice. Joining us is Benjamin Alarie, CEO of BlueJ Legal and the author of the provocative new book, Superjustice, The Future of Law. Benjamin is at the forefront of using artificial intelligence to navigate complex legal landscapes, and I'm thrilled to have him here to unpack what that means for the system as we know it. Ben, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why did you decide to write Superjustice now? What was the illness? Why is it important today?
I think it's becoming obvious that artificial intelligence has a huge role to play in the future of the legal system. A big motivation for me personally, I won't speak for my co-author, Samuel Becker. We go back more than 2 decades. We met as colleagues at Yale Law School as graduate students. But my motivation is really to set the record straight about the huge potential for improvements to justice, the legal system more generally, leveraging AI. I feel like without this book, there's a lot of talk about the potential downsides of leveraging AI in the legal system. Lots of, and appropriately focusing on safety, focusing on things like algorithmic discrimination or bias, and all the potential downsides of leveraging this technology. And there are a whole bunch of people who I would put in the camp of kind of like safety engineers, people who want to make sure that if we leverage AI in the legal system, that it's done safely and carefully and as intelligently as possible. I think there is a woeful undercount of people trumpeting all the beneficial ways that we could be leveraging technology, including artificial intelligence, in the legal system. And I think this is a huge opportunity to talk about that and bring attention to the positive side of the ledger, fully acknowledging the work of those who I'm calling the safety engineers, and recognizing the vital role that they play. But I think it's such a huge opportunity to improve the administration of justice, improve access to basic legal services, make sure that people know how to navigate the legal system to help themselves to remedies that they're entirely entitled to. And mostly, I want justice in the future to be much more like something like roads, public roads, where Superjustice will be an expected, available, and valuable everyday amenity. So it's all about setting the record straight, painting a positive picture of where we can go, and then helping spread that word.
Fascinating stuff. I have to say, I'm really inspired to see someone kind of systematizing this thought because, I briefly served in the administration and really was looking for ways to take these vast quantities of data around customs and to figure out how to fill in some of the gaps I thought were there regarding enforcement. And this was, related to the traceability of goods or what people were claiming, the categories that their goods should fall in and so on. And I was just shocked that more work hadn't been done already. But I'm just fascinated to see your work. So
before we dive in on Superjustice itself, it's interesting and it's a little bit anecdotal, but a good friend of mine was doing algorithmic fairness at a major tech company over the last 5 years. He recently left in February, and I asked, well, did it get better? Did you guys move the needle? Did you make sure that people were all being served correctly and that the law and that these algorithms were working? He said no. Do you think that, and this will be obviously part of the discussion around the actual book, but do you think that this sort of model can actually change the day-to-day lives of people? Like, do you think that's realistic? If there hasn't really been that much progress over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, what makes this moment different?
Oh, Nathan, I'm disappointed for your friend, first of all, to spend 5 years and to feel that no progress was made on algorithmic fairness is a massively frustrating experience, I'm sure, for him. It contrasts quite quite sharply with what I've been witnessing on the front lines of building AI for tax law. So I'm, in addition to being a legal academic at the University of Toronto, and I've done that for more than 20 years. I'm also co-founder and CEO of a company called BlueJ, and BlueJ has been leveraging AI for tax law research for more than the past decade, and we've seen profound improvements in the efficacy of these tools built on AI for tax research over the course of the past, since we started back in 2015. We founded the company, and it's kind of amazing how much better the system is getting dealing with. George, you mentioned customs. I think the most, and it's obviously a very complicated area of the law, classification of goods. I would argue that the most difficult and challenging, complex legal system ever set up in human history is U.S. federal income tax law. And it's not getting simpler. So every year it gets more and more and more complicated. And I don't see that changing. There are too many interests. It collects too much revenue. We're talking about trillions of dollars a year in revenue collected through the tax system in America. We've seen a massive improvement in the efficacy of the tools that we have a hand in building here at BlueJ for improving tax law research. And we're seeing tens of thousands of active users on the system asking literally many millions of questions every year and getting increasingly fantastic answers coming out of the system. It doesn't address like squarely the fairness dimension of what your friend was mentioning to you, Nathan. But I think as these systems get better and better at accurately analyzing, think about the Internal Revenue Code, all the regulations, all the case law, all the IRS rulings, all the professional commentary, academic commentary in tax, and then doing that not just like federally, but also at the state and local tax level, and then also in a cross-border context with international tax, and thinking about the complexity of all the different tax systems around the world. And this is the work that BlueJ is focused on. I can tell you without any reservation whatsoever, the systems are getting significantly better, richer, deeper, more accurate year after year. And I'll give you a statistic. When we started leveraging generative AI to help BlueJ with the underlying production of tax research answers, this was back in early 2023. It was accurate more than 90% of the time, but it was probably like low 90s percentage wise. Now in the platform, we invite people to give a thumbs up or thumbs down on the questions that the answers that they're generating using the system. And we've seen the disagreement rate drop from about 1% at the beginning down to less than 0.1% now. So at least an order of magnitude improvement in the quality of the answers. And I think, intuitively, it's not every case that a user disagrees with the answer that they're going to click the downvote button and provide some color about why they're disagreeing with the response. But it means that over the course of the last 3 years, there's been at least an order of magnitude improvement in the quality of the answers produced by an AI tax research system like the one that we're building here at BlueJ. And so I think I just contest the premise, and I accept, like I would take your friend's testimony at face value and say maybe in that context, for the nature of the work that your friend is doing, I would argue more broadly, actually, the systems are getting wildly better, more efficacious. And I think bringing the systems into greater correspondence with the underlying reality is naturally debiasing, right? Because before, if it's making mistakes, it's just too crude, right? Like the resolution of the reasoning just isn't there. And it's really blocky. It's not lossless. As we move these systems more and more towards kind of lossless answer making, I think it's going to be clearly better also for things like algorithmic fairness.
I wanted to tell our listeners about this letter that I love to read around tax time every year from Donald Rumsfeld. I don't know if you're familiar with this, where he says, he would send this letter as an addendum. Well, I mean, like as an addendum to his tax return. This is like a cabinet member of the United States. I have sent in our federal income tax and our gift tax returns for X year. As in prior years, it's important for you to know that I have absolutely no idea whether our tax returns or our tax payments are accurate. And then he would publish this on X or then Twitter when he had the account. And so I think it's true how many King James Bibles stacked on top of each other is our federal tax code, and how many social issues are addressed through tax as opposed to other mediums of legislation. I mean, it's shocking to me. So all the power to you, and I'm glad to hear that disagreement rate is going down. If I could, though, I wanted to kind of just ask about an area that's really intrigued me, which is whether you think AI has the capacity to harmonize between areas of law. And what I mean by this is that, for example, we have one body of law in the United States, antitrust law, which is meant to protect consumers. And then we have another body of law, the trade statutes, which is meant to protect producers. And notoriously, these laws have different aims, they have different assumptions, they come to different conclusions with the same set of information. And, one of the deep paradoxes that I found as I began to look at data were related to, the less domestically competitive an industry was, so the fewer companies that were in the space trying to do whatever they were doing, the more likely the companies were to succeed when they went to the US government and claimed that they had suffered a trade injury, right? And so here you have this wildly paradoxical situation, right? Where industries that are kind of claiming that they're facing this unfair competition, actually have a very low competition at home, and they're more likely to get what they want when they complain. So I offer this because it's something that I'm interested in. But can AI help us find ways to bring these kind of competing paradigms into alignment or not? Or what do you think?
I think the answer is yes. And this is part of the argument that Samuel Becker and I, kind of put forth in Superjustice is it's a way for the law to learn faster and better across jurisdictions, across areas of law, and not even just learning from doctrine or from precedent, but also learning from outcomes and data, learning from policy work, empirical studies that have been done, things that would normally be regarded as kind of extra legal considerations could be brought into legal analysis and inform, the law in different areas. And I think what then happens is, the legal tools available, the legal apparatus can become more precise and more finely tailored. And that can promote fairness, it can promote efficiency, and it can lead to a much more kind of decentralized, democratized governance system across areas of law. And then, George, like the vision is for law to become kind of much more preventative rather than reactive, and anticipate a lot of those things, and get out in front of new patterns proactively, anticipate how things might develop, and it becomes better than responsive regulation. It's kind of like in advance anticipating what might be required in different areas. I'll give you another example. I really liked your example of like antitrust, as well as like trade law and asking for, trade remedies. In Canada, a really interesting example involves the characterization of workers as independent contractors or as employees. And this comes up in two very different areas of law. One would be in the context of, human rights and employment standards legislation, trying to protect those who are working as employees from, practices by their employers that may not be, adequate to respect workers' rights. And then another in the context of tax law. And in tax law, often parties have an incentive, hirers and workers have an incentive to characterize that relationship as an independent contractor relationship so as to avoid payroll taxes in the Canadian case, employment insurance premiums and Canada Pension Plan or Quebec Pension Plan contributions. And what's really interesting is they're supposed to be applying the same tests in both areas of law because, how do you characterize this working relationship between a hiring party and a worker? Should be based on the same kinds of tests, like who's actually running the business. Is it really just the hirer, or is the worker also functionally, operating independently as a business person? And that should be there should be one answer. But it turns out that the same fact patterns might very well get a different characterization in tax law versus employment standards. And then there's this other thing about it, which is in the common law provinces. So like Ontario, like the rest of Canada outside of Quebec. Quebec uses civil law. And so under civil law, the test for determining whether someone is an employee or not is different. It's in the Civil Code of Quebec. In the rest of the country, it should be based on common law and looking at the precedents and looking at case law. It turns out that within tax law, if the relevant relationship is in Quebec, you use civil law to characterize those workers, and the rest of Canada use the common law to characterize the workers. It's almost a perfect match in how the Tax Court of Canada, which has federal jurisdiction, will map different employment relationships, even though the underlying.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Even though the underlying legal.
The Siri doesn't understand this tax complexity either.
Siri, I don't know how Siri got invoked here. Turn my volume down.
It's confused by tax law.
But it's like they match. So in Quebec and Ontario, the rest of the provinces, they match when it's a tax thing. But if it's not a tax thing, if it's a tax thing versus an employment standards thing, there's actually a bit of a gap between the two different bodies of law and how working relationships get mapped. So it's very interesting. I think we can tighten the laces in some ways on the system by drawing those bodies of case law together. And by the way, I think it shouldn't just be, in a single jurisdiction across these different areas. I think there's a lot of learning we can do globally about how to, mine all of the legal doctrine around the world and get better answers. It doesn't mean that everything needs to exactly match up. It shouldn't be a monolithic kind of rule of law leading to one size fits all. Instead, it should be tailored to local preferences and circumstances. And think about this as a whole bunch of policy experiments that are being run around the world. And then, AI can help us pick the best path forward and lead to a better system.
The people who write and enforce the laws are old often, and it seems to me they can't keep up with changing technology, even when it was as simple as YouTube and Facebook and Google. Does it matter that those who are writing and enforcing these laws probably can't keep up with the speed that AI is moving when it comes to creating a better system? Can it progress even if they are lackluster, the lawmakers?
This is an invitation to criticize lawmakers. I'm not going to do that. I think lawmakers have a very difficult job. They have broad constituencies to represent. They have so many trade-offs that they need to strike. There are a lot of people that they stand to disappoint, no matter which way they turn, with policy decisions, with the ways in which they're pursuing their craft. I think it's a very challenging role, and I have an enormous amount of respect for the difficulties and the challenges associated with the work that legislators do. I think what's interesting is, and I'll draw on my professional experience leveraging, my experience at BlueJ with AI for tax research. It's so interesting because one of the things that a lot of people expect is that it's going to be the junior tax lawyers or the junior tax accountants who are really leveraging a platform like BlueJ to improve their tax research. And what we found actually, in fact, is it's roughly the level of use of something like BlueJ is pretty much the same across the different levels of seniority in these firms. And so you have senior tax partners who are leveraging this technology just as much as the entry level people coming straight out of school, which was really interesting to me because I think I would have sided with the people who would have expected the younger practitioners to be the ones more open to leveraging technology. The digital natives, as we call them, right, are going to be much more open to doing AI-based tax research. But it's very interesting that hasn't actually been our experience. And so in some ways, I think it might, I think many of the listeners will be familiar with like the big five, personality traits or dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. I think somebody's openness to new experiences, as well as their conscientiousness, probably their openness to adopting AI to support their work, is likely to be linked very much with those two traits that people systematically differ on. So psychometricians would say, yeah, there are these big five personality traits that people differ on. And if you're more open to new experiences and you're more conscientious, that's much more likely to lead to being open to leveraging this kind of tech in your work. So this leads to the question, Nathan, like, are legislators the kinds of people who are more open to new experiences and more conscientious? And that, I don't know. I'm sure a political scientist somewhere has studied this. It would be a really interesting question to run. I do firmly believe that those who are proposing legislation, policymakers, those who are working in think tanks and otherwise, there's no question they're going to be leveraging a lot of AI to help inform the recommendations that they're making to legislators for different kinds of approaches. And so even if the legislators themselves are not open to leveraging that technology, I think a lot of the benefits will be smuggled in by those who are trying to find the very best tools to improve the work product.
Yeah. I'd love to jump in and just ask, that kind of discussion of people's affect or their kind of what traits they might have and how that impacts how they want to view AI. I mean, I think that you could make a similar analogy about something like statutory interpretation, because I'm constantly, reminding folks that yes, there's always this, potential concern with hallucinations with AI, but there's also this tremendous, I think, much scarier question of unknown unknowns, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're in the camp of believing you've got to consult more sources rather than fewer to understand what a really ambiguous statutory phrase means, how do you know without the assistance of the best technology available all of the resources that might bear on what the statute means? So people who like legislative history might say, well, AI can go through all this legislative history and find things, but I've found that conservatives who are interested more in like the definition, the public meaning at the time the statute was written, um, they sort of forget that AI can really help you because it's descriptive. It's fundamentally a descriptive technology to find proxies and definitions and other sources that can shed light on the specific meanings of words. And my big hobby horse right now is to try to demonstrate to people that there was a distinction between tariffs and taxes at the founding of the United States. And the only way to do that is to go to really kind of what we would consider obscure sources and just deal with hundreds and hundreds of pages of text to try to find examples and usages. But anyway, I just mentioned that because I think, it might broaden the scope by which people can do those very fine-grained tasks. And whether they're concerned about unknown unknowns is kind of equally important, to whether they're concerned about, hallucinations and the other things we occasionally see AI do. Just a statement about I mean, I'm just amazed how often people will be like, well, can you really trust it? And I'm like, well, how else would you digitize all of this? I mean, because really, if you're looking at archival material, going from archival material to it being analyzed, having done this myself a lot, it is actually this incredibly strenuous, difficult process. But now if you can use AI to digitize archival material, or books that are not typically sort of searchable, or they're not on LexisNexis, which I kind of call like the Netflix of legal research, because Netflix has wonderful resources, but in the world of actual films made in human history, it has a very narrow slice, right? I would say. And so, I mention this to people because I want to, kind of up the ante in terms of what the risks are of not using AI, which is that I think there's this unknown problem that you wouldn't think of looking to a resource that AI, by dint of its incredible kind of compute capacity, could do. So anyway, maybe that's a tangent, but
well, no, I think I agree, and the way I would think about it is this is kind of like, we had the first experience of this, and I think you'll agree with this, when some of the big tech companies, Google most famously, went back and digitized massive amounts of kind of pre-copyright books, right? And they're the whole saga of like the Google books litigation. But fundamentally, Google just wanted to digitize all of the world's information and allow it to be searchable. And that led to locating all kinds of resources. And you can, different things you can do with Google, tracking the usage, the relative rate of usage of different words, different terms over time in those materials. And like going back to the example you gave, George, of like the uses of the terms taxes and tariffs. I assume that a bunch of that work, I got to turn this off. A bunch of that work that you would have been referencing would have been, you would have found a bunch of that stuff leveraging Google and those digitization projects, then looking in those sources and seeing what those sources themselves are referencing and kind of following the chain back. I think you're exactly right. But then once you find that variety of resources, how do you actually synthesize all of that into a common kind of like, what's it cash out into? And like, how do you weigh all these competing things? Otherwise it's a rhetorical exercise of, well, I found like this handful of sources using it this way. And then there are a couple counterexamples here, which is, it's fine. Sometimes that's the best you can do. But if you want to kind of like make an attempt to do a population level kind of survey, you're going to have to leverage technology to make that happen. So this is in some ways a continuation of the democratization of information that really kicked off in earnest in the late 90s and early 2000s with the work of Google and other big tech companies.
Mm-hmm. And I think it might also just demonstrate how some of our kind of touchstone principles, which were informed by a great legal mind kind of making a monumental inference, right? Like maybe they were mistaken based on the evidence at the time, but before, that would be a very difficult thing to reconstruct in a truly like sort of, I don't know, objective way. You'd always be accused of cherry picking. But in this case, it sort of removes that a bit, I think, from the analysis, because you can say, well, the data was collected in such and such fashion and so on. So,
anyway. And the really cool thing you can do leveraging these new methods of doing legal research is you can ask a question and you can pose it in a neutral way, and then you can get a response. And then you can ask follow-up questions like, what's the strongest counter argument to that? To somebody who wanted to argue the contrary position, what evidence would you marshal? Get that answer. And then how would you respond to that? And you can kind of gin up like an adversarial conversation leveraging these research tools. And it's really powerful if you do that, because then you'll be able to actually have the system produce the best, and even better if you do it using, several different of the frontier models. So frontier model A, frontier model B, frontier model C, and then you kick off these adversarial, things in each one of them, and then you start braiding the responses back across them, and they're going to be leveraging different parameter weights. They have slightly different corpuses that they've been trained on. and you can produce a really, really authoritative, strongly persuasive answer leveraging these multiple sources. And so I think it's very exciting for the kind of work that you're describing, how to leverage these new technologies. Completely agree.
If we focus mostly on like tax law, but say a system is using AI to provide judicial support for things even outside of taxes, who's the ultimate agent of accountability when things go wrong?
Yeah, so I'll speak for BlueJ specifically here. We are doing our level best to create a system that provides the most accurate possible tax research answers, findings. Ultimately, our customers, our users, are tax professionals. So they may be tax lawyers, they could be tax accountants. It's very clear in the case of both accountants and lawyers that their professional responsibility is to, make sure that any guidance, any legal advice that they're giving, any tax advice that they're giving to their clients is their professional advice. They need to stand behind the advice that they're giving. And I think that's appropriate. These systems are not perfect. Generative AI famously can produce mistaken answers. Humans, by the way, parenthetically, also produce mistaken answers, arguably at a higher rate than generative AI. But, belt and suspenders is better than either belt or suspenders. And so it's ultimately, the job of the human professional to double check the sources, double check the reasoning, before they sign off and deliver that professional advice to their clients. And it's always been the case. So professionals have never been able to blame their tools for work that is mistaken. And that's still the case. All the guidance coming out of the different bar associations, coming out of the different regulators, including the AICPA, and others on the accounting side, CPA Canada, all suggest, yes, you have an obligation to remain tech literate and stay up on the new technologies as they're developed, to inform your professional judgment. And then B, you also need to exercise your professional judgment, and you need to make sure that you are standing behind the advice that you're giving to your clients. And it's not enough to say, well, a tool produced this answer, and who am I to second guess the tool? The point is you're a professional, and that's who you are, to second guess the tool and to double check the tool's answer. And so it's not enough just to tell that to professionals. I think, what I mentioned just a moment ago about really encouraging users to adopt this adversarial position with respect to the tools and say, well, what's the strongest counter argument? And then really kind of beat up positions before they take a stance, is a very powerful move. And I tell everyone who will listen that they should be leveraging their tools in this way, and ideally using multiple tools, multiple different models to inform their analysis, and then going back to the primary authoritative materials to make sure that the models are not misreading a provision of the Internal Revenue Code or misreading some aspect of the regulations or case law in the way that it's informing the work product.
Interesting. This is a little more broad, and then I have one more, unless George has more. But it's interesting. If you talk to people who are reading books all day and whatever else, everyone understands the importance of AI, how quickly it moves. But if you go to, I hate to say it this way, but real America, where I am right now in Georgia, if you talk to anyone, AI still doesn't really come up. And I think that those people are at a real risk of being left behind. Do you think that AI can democratize smarts, ambition, and hustle, or do you have to? Is it too late for them, or can they catch up for normal people, or will only the elites or people who've run strong tax firms for a long time really have it?
This is something that Professor Beck and I talk about in Superjustice: is how do we bridge this digital divide? So, I think tax administration see this, the IRS sees this, the CRA sees this. It would be great to move entirely onto electronic filing methods for income taxes. There are lots of older Americans who do not have computers, who every year want to have the paper-based tax return that they have been grown familiar with over decades and decades, and they want to fill it out with a pencil and maybe an eraser at their kitchen table with their shoe boxes of receipts around them, and maybe a digital solar-powered calculator by their side so they can run their sums and do like add up the different line numbers and whatever. There are folks for whom that's what tax compliance looks like. Maybe they don't even have internet access or a computer, let alone a smartphone. How do you bridge that gap? And of course, Nathan, like those folks are not part of the AI conversation fluently. They're going about their business, and they probably have a landline, and that's how they communicate with the world. And it's the world is changing, but the world changes unevenly for different folks. So some of us are keeping up with all the new technology that's coming out, and even building new technologies, and there are laggards, and it's a real question. It's the importance of this digital divide is probably just increasing over time. I don't think it's an easy fix. So we talk about it. We acknowledge it's one of those engineering problems that I think the safety engineers, that I started the conversation invoking, have raised it. It's a significant issue, and in the United States, it takes on one form, and then think about globally, it takes on a whole different form, right? So think about like sub-Saharan Africa, think about other parts of the world which are probably further behind, various places, even domestically. It's a global equity issue. It's a domestic equity issue. I think it's challenging.
Fascinating. George, do you have any other questions?
No, this has been such a great conversation, and I'm now kind of excited to go back to my team and set up some more tasks to try to do that braiding you talked about and other things. So thank you for the inspiration. I have to grab this book and make it a signed reading.
And Ben, where can people get your book, Superjustice?
So the best way to learn about it, go to superjustice.com. There's a link there that will give you a 30% discount if you order it directly from the publisher, Oxford University Press. It's available for pre-order prior to July 30th. After July 30th, it'll be available. It launches July 30th, 2026. And there are also links there to the book on, the various book retailers. And there's an audio version that'll be available on Audible and other audio platforms available very soon as well.
Wonderful. And are you on X?
I'm not on X. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, Benjamin Alarie.
The only thing is LinkedIn doesn't have good baseball clips. But Benjamin Alarie, thank you for the time, for your fascinating scholarship and leadership in this space. And we'll be sure to have you on again very soon.
Super. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks again for joining this episode of Clearer Than Truth. Be sure to tune in next time and share with your friends.